Bitcoin rising this morning following news that Tesla has bought about $1.5 billion in the cryptocurrency.
Tesla has put $1.5 billion into Bitcoin.
This is a game changer. And in hindsight, it was inevitable. When Tesla, one of the largest and most innovative companies in the world, announces that they're adding $1.5 billion of Bitcoin to their balance sheet and also accepting it as payment for their services, every other company on the world is put on watch and has to play catch up. In this video, we're gonna go over the secrets as to why exactly Tesla bought Bitcoin, what it means for the value of Tesla, the company, and the value of Bitcoin, and what companies could possibly be next. Before we jump into this video, all I ask is that you hit that little like button down below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, as of course it helps me create more videos just like this one. If you told me like 2 years ago that Tesla was gonna put $1.5 billion into Bitcoin, or even 1 year ago, I probably would have called you insane. But if you look at what has happened in the world of monetary policy and cryptocurrency, this move actually makes a ton of sense. Let me break it down. As a massive corporation, Tesla has a responsibility to its shareholders to hold excess cash or cash equivalents, sort of like a rainy day fund in case they want to build something new, acquire something, or just to have an overall healthy balance sheet. Now, in a normal year, if you held cash or some cash-like equivalents, you'd probably be pretty well off just putting it into a bond. In Tesla's case, they had around $19 billion, so if they put that into a bond that generated about 4%, they'd be able to make about $80 million in income off of that per year. But this isn't a normal year. Everybody's still locked up at home, the Federal Reserve is printing trillions of dollars to try and save the economy, and interest rates are effectively zero. And in some parts of the world, they're even negative, which means you could literally go to the bank, apply for a mortgage, and instead of paying interest on that mortgage, the bank would pay you. And there lies the problem. What do you do with $19 billion in your emergency fund? With money flooding the system from every which way, holding onto cash is like holding onto a melting ice cube, losing purchasing power every week and every month. So to salvage some of that melting value, what could you buy? Stocks, real estate, buy back your own shares? Sure. But each one of those comes with their own set of complications and tax implications as well. What's a whole lot simpler is Bitcoin, an asset with a totally fixed, finite supply that can't be diluted like the money-melting ice cube, and has appreciated on average 200% per year. But going even a step further, Tesla has announced that they're going to be accepting Bitcoin for things like their cars, which only brings more validation and more value to Bitcoin. So Tesla was not the first public company to buy Bitcoin. Earlier in August 2020, a company named MicroStrategy actually converted almost their entire balance sheet into Bitcoin, led by their CEO, Michael Saylor. And as recently as last week, Michael Saylor actually hosted an event with over 1,400 CEOs and executives from public companies to family offices to pension funds, showing them exactly how to approach Bitcoin and put it into their treasuries or balance sheets. And one of the benefits to adding Bitcoin to your balance sheet is that you can classify it as an indefinite-lived intangible asset. Now, without getting into a bunch of accounting purposes, what that essentially means is that if you own Bitcoin and you bought it at a certain price and it drops in value, you can actually claim that as an impairment loss to offset your earnings, which could actually lead to lower taxes. But if the price of Bitcoin goes up from where you paid for it, you don't have to claim that appreciation under your net income. It becomes one of your assets, which means Tesla has just purchased something that can add value to their company without bringing any more excess taxes. So this is just one idea from the conference that Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy hosted, teaching corporations about how Bitcoin can enrich and bring more value to their corporations and protect their cash, which we all know is slowly being depreciated through inflation. So with over 1,400 CEOs and executives at this event hosted by MicroStrategy, the question is, who's going to be next?
We finally got a monetary system governed by rules, not rulers. Where are some of the smartest people in the world shifting their careers to focus? Where are some of the best developers in the world going? They're going to Bitcoin. And I'd never underestimate the power of a mass movement of developers. And don't underestimate the ferocity of the emerging decentralized class, us Bitcoiners. I mean, just like early encounters with the printing press and antibiotics and aqueducts and the internet itself, they were incalculably underestimated. People incalculably underestimate Bitcoin.
All right, so if you've been watching CNBC and some of these other financial news channels, the question that every CEO of a major public company is getting is, are you going to add Bitcoin to your balance sheet? Are you going to start accepting Bitcoin? But for the purposes of this video, I want to go over some of the companies that have the most net cash on their balance sheets in the S&P 500 and talk about the probability of some of these companies also adding Bitcoin to hedge the risk of inflation with their cash reserves. All right, cool. So this list is updated as of, I think, early 2020. So it was pre-coronavirus, but generally I would say this is probably pretty accurate as to who has the most cash reserves right now. So some of the people on this list, we'll just start from the top, are Alphabet, and this would be considered Google. I think Google is a somewhat good contender for getting into putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. I'm not going to say it's going to happen this year. It's something that they're probably going to approach pretty slow, but it's important for them because they are in the software space and they have Android integration, and it's something where if Apple or another software provider adds more crypto integration in their payment platforms, they naturally have to play catch up and join in on the fun. And by accepting Bitcoin, they're likely going to end up having some portion of their balance sheet involved in it as well. Now, the second list on this name is Apple. Now, there's actually a whole bunch of videos on this, but Apple has a massive cash overflow problem in the sense that they have $200 billion of cash or cash equivalents, and they haven't really been able to spend it over the last few years. And of course, with what's been going on with coronavirus and money printing, if let's just say the real yield of value of cash has been dropping maybe closer to 10 to 15% per year, that is billions of dollars that they are losing in power with their money. So the idea of putting Bitcoin onto their balance sheet is really compelling because it would only cost them maybe 2 billion out of that 200 or so billion that they have on their cash reserves. I think this website says 90 billion, but I think it's a little bit higher now. If they just took 1 to 2% of that, maybe $1 to $3 billion worth of Bitcoin, they could be extremely well hedged in the event that Bitcoin appreciates upwards of six figures, 100K, 200K. They could be generating a really good return and offsetting some of that inflation cost by not having a place to directly spend that cash or cash equivalents. Now, we know that Apple is looking to do something with their cash. They've announced that they've wanted to get into the electric vehicle space. They kind of put this notice out there that they wanted to work with, I think, Hyundai and Kia, but those talks have kind of dissolved. And I think what they're essentially seeing is this potential to diversify their offerings kind of slipping away with them, and Tesla probably chipping away at that opportunity cost. So Microsoft makes a lot of sense on this list because they have also integrated Bitcoin in their services as early as 2014 when Bitcoin was, I think, only like $100 or $200. They were already accepting Bitcoin for services like Microsoft Live, I think Xbox Live, you could buy memberships on there. And they make a lot of sense to add it to their balance sheet because they've also been pursuing creating blockchain apps and working with Bitcoin developers to speed up the network or create second layer applications based on the Bitcoin blockchain. This article states that they have about $47 billion in cash. So again, taking about 1% of that would be about $500 million. Putting that into Bitcoin, it would be a big rallying cry. Now, Tesla is a pretty big company, but in terms of market cap, it's one of the largest companies in the S&P 500, but in terms of revenue, it's not even close to some of the top 10. And having a big company like Microsoft get into it, it's going to pull in people like Apple almost immediately to get into it, and all sorts of other software companies as well, looking to diversify some of the excess cash that they have in their balance sheet. So for me, Microsoft is number one on this list to do such a move in the future. Now, number 4 on this list is Facebook, and they're kind of interesting too because they have pursued creating their own cryptocurrency. I did a video a long time ago on one called Libra, which they've now rebranded as Diem. But to be perfectly honest, they haven't really made any foray advancements with that. There's no cryptocurrency integration into Facebook as we speak as of this day. They banned ads based around cryptocurrency at one point, and then they re-enabled it after they realized that they wanted more money. I get a lot of ads on Facebook for cryptocurrency. So the odds of Facebook getting into Bitcoin, I think anytime soon, are pretty low considering what is going on with the Winklevoss twins getting into it and Mark Zuckerberg. There's this really funny story if you've ever read this book called Bitcoin Billionaires, where at kind of the tailwind of, I think after the whole lawsuit and settling all that, the Winklevoss twins wanted to kind of have this reconciliation conversation with Mark Zuckerberg. And so they set up this meeting, but Mark Zuckerberg basically said, I don't trust you guys. I want to have this meeting in an open room with other people there. And they thought that was weird and didn't want to do that. And so they ended up having this meeting, and it was in this glass room in an office setting, and there were dozens of people outside watching watching him. And if you've seen the movie and you know the people, like the Winklevoss twins are these like 6'5" professional rowers, and Mark Zuckerberg is Mark Zuckerberg. And the whole idea is that he's probably afraid they were going to beat him up, which is pretty funny for one of the biggest CEOs in the world. But yeah, we all have our flaws. So the next on this list, number 5, is Cisco Systems. They have our communication network, provide phone services, internet, all that sort of stuff, video communication. They have expressed interest in blockchain, but not Bitcoin particularly itself. I don't know the likelihood of them investing any of their capital into Bitcoin. They don't have a massive balance sheet, so it's not immediately at the top of the list of their priorities to do so. But they are interested in blockchain, and they could down the road become one of these vendors that accepts it for payment as something for services. Number 6 on this list is Humana. If you know about Humana, they are a healthcare provider. I don't think that they're going to enter Bitcoin in any way. They also have launched pilot blockchain projects tracking things like patient data and things like that on the blockchain. But in terms of Bitcoin itself, in terms of hedging their assets, I don't think they are a super likely candidate for that. So next on this list is NVIDIA, and NVIDIA, if you know anything about them, they produce a lot of graphic cards and processors and things like that. And they already have some sort of exposure to the growth of Bitcoin and blockchain because they are one of the providers of mining cards. So I don't think they have a real incentive to get any more into cryptocurrency. I think they might develop some cryptocurrency focused mining rigs so that they can, cash in on kind of the growth of the demand of Bitcoin. Of course, as the price of Bitcoin appreciates, there is much more of a demand to get into mining as it becomes a lot more profitable. And of course, as one of the best chip producers out there, they could be producing chips. But in terms of having it as reserves, I don't think that they are first in line for it. I don't think it's something that would happen in 2020 necessarily, maybe even next year. But I could totally see them accepting it as payment, just as a lot of these other mining chip producers have also done in the past as well. And then number 9 on this list is Norton LifeLock. And if you know about the Norton firewall and virus protection software, they have not expressed any interest whatsoever to get into Bitcoin, but I think they would be a really interesting target to do so because they have built up this reputation of cybersecurity and firewalls. And so if they ended up going down the road of developing something like a Bitcoin wallet or something similar where they could provide custody for Bitcoin and protect you from losing it or exposing yourself to hackers, I think they would do extremely well with it. It's a brand that could be perfectly aligned with this growing movement of self-custody into Bitcoin. And yeah, I mean, they have $8 billion or so on their balance sheet. They have some of the most cash reserves on their balance sheet out of most companies in the S&P 500. But I don't think that necessarily they would add Bitcoin unless they go down that road of providing services for Bitcoin in the future. If they end up being a wallet provider, if they end up getting into software or hardware for Bitcoin, I think then eventually they would maybe show some solidarity and get into it themselves, but probably not until then. And then last on this list is PayPal. And if you know about PayPal, they were back in October enabling the purchasing of cryptocurrencies through their platform. Now, I'm happy I made this video when I did. I was going to make it about 2 or 3 days beforehand. Now that Tesla has gotten into Bitcoin, they've come out and they've said that they don't quite see themselves investing and moving some of their balance sheet into Bitcoin in the future, but they are, of course, going to continue to build out services that will allow people to purchase Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, and all of these other cryptocurrencies on their platform. They aren't as well capitalized and they don't have as big of a balance sheet as some of these other companies, but they have aligned themselves a lot with cryptocurrency in the last year. And yeah, it'd be a very positive move for them as well. So to get into my final thoughts on all of this, every company that adds Bitcoin to their balance sheet is making Bitcoin more valuable. When a company goes out and they purchase $1.5 billion of Bitcoin, they're not going on a Coinbase the next day and trying to day trade it or flip it or anything like that, obviously because of the tax implications, and also because they're moving such a large quantity and all of this stuff is trackable on the Bitcoin network. There's some really interesting statistics that have shown that basically in the last few months, the amount of Bitcoin available on exchanges has dropped dramatically. So you can really see the impact of all of these institutions getting into Bitcoin, buying it, and then putting it into long-term storage. When a company like MicroStrategy or Tesla gets into Bitcoin, the plan is never to sell it within the next year or the next 2 years. These are people and companies that are looking to make it a permanent fixture onto their balance sheet. In fact, 6% of all of the Bitcoin in existence right now is in corporate treasuries. And the only companies that really have it are MicroStrategy, Square, and Tesla. And there's some other smaller ones that have Bitcoin in the reserves, but these are more Bitcoin-centric companies to begin with. Once you start seeing other companies from the S&P 500, which are very likely to get into Bitcoin, the supply and the availability of Bitcoin is going to drop dramatically. And when you have that fixed supply and that increasing demand, what do you get? Increasing prices. And so I think it's going to be very beneficial what Tesla has done here to Bitcoin to kind of kickstart this movement of other companies getting into adding it to their treasuries. And at some point, the question, again, like I've said before, isn't going to be why Bitcoin? It's going to be why haven't you already gotten Bitcoin? There are people like athletes now accepting half of their paychecks in Bitcoin. There are companies like Strike, which is founded by Jack Mallers, who are using the Bitcoin Lightning Network to instantly settle hundreds of transactions per millisecond. And the way that this would work is, let's say you're working a job, you could literally be streamed money for your time. There's actually a little tech demo where he shows that you can get, money coming to your bank account every 5 seconds. That's something technologically that is impossible with the current framework of Visa, MasterCard, Swift, or any of these other payment processors. But on Bitcoin, you could totally do this. You could get your paycheck every hour of every day, and the moment you stop working, the moment the paychecks stop coming in your account. My thoughts about Bitcoin in general too is that a lot of people see it as this bubble, but if you look at the price history of Bitcoin, you can't even see the other bubbles that have appeared. Bitcoin at one point went from $1 to $30, back to $3, from $3 to $1,000, back to $100, from $100 to $20,000 to back to $3,000. And now we're at $48,000, $50,000, and you can barely see the last 3 years of history because of how far Bitcoin has come since then. And so the way that I look at Bitcoin is it's not something where it's a big bubble and it comes down and a big bubble and it comes down. I look at Bitcoin like an S-curve, where it has grown in adoption. There have been this kind of wave of early adopters, but now that institutions are more seriously getting into it, I think you're going to start seeing that exponential growth to it just becoming the standard. So the chart looks more like an S, where it's got this gradual rise, and then everybody has Bitcoin in some way or another. Your pension fund has it, your 401k has it, the company that you work for down the road has it, you have it. Everyone is going to own Bitcoin at some point. I think this is a complete inevitability. I think the people last on the list to accept it are going to be the Federal Reserves. But once you start seeing sovereign nations start to add it to their balance sheets, just like they've added gold and other assets, I think it's game over. I'd love to know your thoughts down below if you think there's any other public companies that I missed on this list that might be getting into Bitcoin. I mentioned Square, MicroStrategy, of course. There's a lot of other small companies that are like mining producers or other software producers that have added Bitcoin. I think it's really interesting. I think we finally come to the point where people are not able to just call Bitcoin a fad or a bubble, but more of an inevitability. And so we're going to see so many people integrating it in the future, and I just can't wait for all the stories that are going to come out this year, going over who's next. Yeah, thanks for watching this video. Again, leave a like, comment down below. It really helps the algorithm, and subscribe if you haven't. We're going to put out more of these videos. I'm going to cover any news that you guys are interested in. I really appreciate all the awesome reception on that latest video I made on how to buy Bitcoin in Canada. If you haven't watched that, go get yourself some damn Bitcoin at this point. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.